Greetings from Castle Goring, from Mickey, Aurora, and from me. Well, I'm sure you know the good news. Well, constructiveness has prevailed over destructiveness. Goodness has prevailed over its opposite number. And we are not going to be made to tolerate the presence of a certain individual whose conduct has led many of us to regard her as a creature of great odium and odiousness. Oh, dear, Aurora, come and console Marty. Marty's so distressed. Poor Megsy baby isn't going to be able to come to the coronation. No, and as you will know by now, they're already putting the spin on it that Megsy baby has made the ultimate sacrifice because she's such a devoted mother, that she's sacrificing for her children. Because after all, Archie turns 4 that day, and Archie would be really traumatized if Archie didn't manage to get a birthday party with Mommy, although Mommy could leave him to go to Uvalde, and Mommy can leave him to go all over the place when it suits her to get column inches and publicity. Well, I'm going to let you into 1 or 2 secrets that I have been told. The first of which is that Meghan and Harry tried to negotiate on an equal basis with the palace, and the palace was having not a bit of it. And their demands were unreasonable and were pointedly rejected. For instance, that Archie play as prominent a part as George, because Archie is George's equal. And Archie deserves to play as large a part in it. Well, ha ha ha, didn't work out like that, did it? That's one thing. Also, Meghan and Harry both know that absolutely no one wanted to see them. Nobody wants to interact with them. And even if people will make some allowances for Stockholm Harry, nobody is making allowances for Symbionese Meg. And they just made it absolutely clear that she was totally persona non grata, and if she came, she would be treated in such a way that it would be apparent. Yes, she would have been treated courteously, but with the courtesy of ice. Also, the seating would have made it apparent that if she were present, that she was not going to be seated according to the table of succession, but she was going to be seated according to the non-working aspect of her choice, which of course meant that she was going to, well, Netflix was going to have a big problem because 3 times in a row they're shown to be of no consequence. While if Harry comes on his own, the whole matter is moderated and massaged. Now, I have to tell you, my understanding is that everybody in the family feels that Harry has been led down the garden path by Meghan, that without her, none of this would have happened, and therefore, although he has some liability, the fact of the matter is she has been the creator, the architect, the executor of the whole thing. And therefore, they wanted to make it absolutely clear that they will have absolutely nothing to do with her. She evidently regarded that as intolerable, because since she has ugly toes, they're supposed to suck them. Well, they aren't sucking her toes. So, it works out very well insofar as we, the British people, and supporters of the monarchy are concerned. I think it's actually the ideal solution, because Harry is his father's son, and this is going to be the king's, well, the greatest day of his life. So I understand, and I hope you will understand, why it actually is by and large a good thing that Harry comes. It's actually, in my opinion, a better thing that Harry comes than that Harry absents himself. But it's certainly a great thing that Meg's baby is going to save all those talents for everybody in California. Nikki, I feel a cold coming on. Catch a flying pig. Mickey, I'm peckish. Do you think you can roast me a chicken? And Mickey, afterwards, do you think you can make me waffles for breakfast? I'm so clever. I'm just so chic. I'm so metropolitan. You could even say I'm urban. And I'm certainly classy with it. There's great jubilation across the land, I am absolutely positive of. And some of the jubilant comments and some of the jubilant communications I have received show that sometimes, as the Jamaicans say, when you spit in the sky, it will fall in your eye. Oh dear. One tear at a time, getting rid of the saliva that she spat in her own face. So, those of you who think that sometimes karma revisits, yes. But I have to say, because Meghan has trapped herself in playing the role of the sensitive, Harry will believe that it's because she can't face all that hatred. She can't face all those awful people who just don't love her and worship at her altar the way he does. Well, more than that, I don't think I need to say. And I have to say, had it not been for everybody making their sentiments known, you can depend on it, that frowsy cow would have been there with her Joan Collins walk, sashing down that aisle as if she were a character in a western and she was in the bar with all of the gold rush guys. Lorna Shadbolt says, was there really a hack? Funny how the only royal birth announcement that was hacked was Moon Bump Meg's. Why was the official announcement so different without signatures of the medical professionals who delivered a child from her body? It smells of a cover-up. Well, if you look at the birth announcement put out by Buckingham Palace, and I'm now not referring to the birth announcement with regard to the claim of surrogacy that was put out by Kensington Palace. We'll get to that in a little while. And may I say that after all of this, I hope we can move on from this subject, at least for a while. The official announcement of every single royal birth has been that such and such was safely delivered of a baby boy or a baby girl. And the names of the attending physicians are there listed with their signatures. None of this took place. The announcement effectively said that the palace had been informed that the Duchess of Sussex had been safely delivered of a son. So in other words, the announcement said, we were told. It didn't say we are telling anybody. It didn't say we are asserting that she was safely delivered of a son. It said that they were told that she had been safely delivered of a son. Now, if you have any respect for the language, and if you have respect for the meaning of words, you will see that that is a huge and a radical difference. And that even in the official birth announcement, the palace was making it absolutely clear that they were attesting to nothing except what information they had received. Presumably, it doesn't say it, but it's obvious, from Harry and Meghan. Does it smell of a cover-up? I'm not sure it smells of a cover-up. I think it smells rather strongly, but I don't think this is either a fit time or place to go into this in any greater depth than I am going into at this time. Lael Wikstrom says, how many times has the Kensington Palace website been hacked? Insofar as I'm aware, once. And Kathy Monteiro says, this alleged possible posting for a few hours of a surrogate birth, even if it was an alleged hack, or more believably the truth, in my opinion, is possibly the best information that should be investigated. Actually, she says probably, not possibly. No bad feelings towards the innocent children, but I don't believe the royal website was hacked at that serendipitous time. It was probably posted in truthfulness without regard for the line of succession ramifications. I cannot wait for this to be substantiated. And I am reading this and other comments out because it is thanks to you that this matter came to my attention and that has come to the attention of people. And it is thanks to you, the public, the sentient, conscious, perceptive, commonsensical, intelligent, no nonsense public, that this matter has not been allowed to be buried. Of course, as we know, Harry and Meghan would love to silence all of you. They love to silence the internet. They would love to get rid of freedom of speech. I wonder why. I think this sort of topic and your comments might be a clue. Judy Treichel says, building a family through surrogacy is fine, but in Harry's case, the consequences are that the children are not entitled to be included in the line of succession. That's absolutely right. If those children had been born of surrogates, and I am not saying they were, I'm making no accusations, I'm making no claims. We are discussing the fact that the Kensington Palace website asserted that Archie had been born of a surrogate. And that is a valid subject for discussion. But if any royal child or aristocratic child is born of a surrogate and it cannot be adopted by the couple, because, of course, if it's born of a surrogate, the mother has to adopt it. But if the father is the natural father, he cannot adopt his child. Therefore, the child is not entitled to any title whatsoever, not even a courtesy title, because you cannot adopt your own child. Adopted children are entitled to courtesy titles, but not illegitimate children. And in this country, the product of a surrogacy is illegitimate until it is legally adopted by a couple. And you can't adopt your own child. So that's a very good point from Judy Treichel. Witcher Wu says, surrogate for Archie. The statement was hacked. How many other statements have been wrongly put up? None is my guess. Never before has this happened. Plus, it was up for hours before being replaced. So, Lady C, can you verify how many other statements have been wrongly put up and then replaced in the history of Kensington Palace's public notices? Well, my dear Witcheroo, I'm not going to investigate this. I will take a reasoned guess and come up with the figure of 0. To the best of my knowledge, there have been no other Kensington Palace public notices that were allegedly hacked. I think we can rest it there and hear what Empath Ambience has to say. I could never imagine Kensington Palace ever being hacked. Nor can I really, but anything is possible, especially in the land of the living, and witcheroo, honey poo, doodaloo, anything is possible. Mickey, catch that flying pig, please! Wake up, wake up, wake up. Esther 22 says, don't believe it was a hack in the Kensington Palace website. I believe that was the truth, and most likely some staff wanted the world to know the truth that surrogacy took place. And I have read Esther 22's comment out because there are many people who think that that is the most likely explanation of what happened. Because remember, Meghan had been very abusive of the staff. Meghan had let everybody know how great and grand she was and how totally ordinary and not worthy of respect, consideration, or anything they were. They were like the feces from a dog walk on the soles of her Louboutin. And yes, there was talk amongst the staff. There was talk after the 16th of January, after the visit near Liverpool. There was talk. There were inquiries made of the palace, and there was talk. The fact of the matter is that my understanding is that the family were the ones who knew the least. And what they told, they dismissed as unbelievable. They didn't believe it. But some members of staff, I would imagine, did believe it. And I think the most likely explanation is it was a revenge posting. And that whoever did it thought, you think you're so clever, and you think you can get away with just dropping loads on us from a great height? Well, I'm gonna show you. And they did. Cuffs says the late Queen was astute. I wonder. Prince Philip had the measure of Has and Megsy. Why didn't the Queen? Why did she give them titles if she was concerned about their integrity, etc.? That was a huge mistake, big block capitals. It shows how little she actually thought it through. Now the entire family is stuck with her mistake. That's actually not an out-of-line observation. Except, I think, in fairness to the late Queen, she had no idea, as did nobody else. I mean, let me put it this way. When I was told all that was going on behind the scenes, so that I would write the book that was going to be the shot across the bow for Megsy Baby and has been and never was, we might call them, or haggard and harried. I didn't appreciate the enormity and what would come next, and nor did anybody in the family. When you're dealing with somebody who is as resourceful and strategic and cold-blooded and boundaryless, as Meghan has proven by her actions to be, you cannot imagine that they are going to come up with the things they come up with. You might know they're capable of anything, but you rarely don't think they're going to do some of the dreadful things they do. Now, I know this from my own experience with my mother. You can't, when you're in that situation, imagine what people of that predisposition will do. You rarely can't. I don't think also that the Queen actually realized that by giving Harry the dukedom, which was an honorific that was expected, that they would utilize it and abuse the gift the way they have done. I honestly do not think that she for a second imagined that what went on to happen could possibly happen, including them walking out of the royal family and doing it the way they did. Because remember, they gave the Queen 20 minutes notice. 20 minutes notice. And she was totally gobsmacked, as was everybody else. Insofar as integrity is concerned, I think she genuinely thought that, I think even Prince Philip thought that Meghan would function within the fold, maybe with some difficulty, maybe with some chafing, maybe with some complaint, but I don't think either of them imagined in a month of Sundays that she would kick over the traces the way she did. And I know as a fact that when she started with the whole commercial deals and all the rest of it, they couldn't believe what was going on. Nobody could believe that she would be doing this and that she was doing it. And they actually thought that if she were given sufficient warning as to the unacceptability of it all, that she would actually rein herself in. They were trying to rein her in, and she was quite determined not to be reined in. So I think it wasn't a huge mistake, because also, had Harry not been given the dukedom, there would have been immediate accusations from Meghan and Harry that it was because of the fact that she was mixed race. And that would have damaged relations, race relations within this country, which is a very multiracial country, and within the Commonwealth, which is primarily brown or black. So no, I think with hindsight, it was the right judgment call, because nobody had foresight. Nobody actually understood that they were dealing with what the Sussex Club has called a sociopathic narcissist. And Meghan's conduct suggests that she is a sociopathic narcissist. Yorkshire Gal says, I believe our late Queen was onto Harry and Meghan fairly early on. I imagine not being able to trust your grandson was a terrible thing. I'm so pleased our late Majesty cannot see how low the Harkles have gone in their quest to damage the monarchy. Well, the late Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh gave Meghan every chance. He never liked her. He thought she was trouble from the word go. The Queen liked her at first, and so did Prince Charles, as he then was, because she set out to charm them. And she succeeded, but only until the nonsense started. And when the Queen was flooded with complaints about Meghan's conduct, at that point she thought, oh dear, what do we have here? But she certainly did not envisage Megxit. Nobody envisaged Megxit except Harry and Meghan, and they had been laying the plans all along, which means that Meghan went into the marriage knowing that she needed to get out. Tamara Henry says, the thing I can't understand is if the late Queen had Meghan's measure early on, why did she give her permission for them to marry? After all, he could not marry without her permission as a prince and working royal. Well, you're wrong. He could have married without her permission. He would have had to have obtained Parliament's permission. And this would have caused a tremendous problem. And, as I say in my book, Meghan and Harry, the real story, the Queen was made to understand if she did not agree to the marriage, she would be accused of racism. That's why she agreed to the marriage. She didn't want the marriage. Nobody wanted the marriage except Harry. Judith Marnati Weekland says, Lady C, you have a vast knowledge of British monarch history. Has there ever been another woman in history like Meghan? I don't mean race, but more to the point of just a bad person. I've heard people compare her to Wallis Simpson, but then other people say they aren't alike at all except for divorced American. Have there been any wives that were just downright nasty? Yes, Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn wanted Henry VIII to execute his daughter Mary, chop off her head. That's what Anne Boleyn wanted. Anne Boleyn was a vengeful, power-hungry, power-crazed, devious, manipulative, but sophisticated, intelligent, and had some principles because she was a Protestant, while Henry VIII was never a Protestant. And her pushing of Protestantism, as well as her constant challenging of the king and of his beliefs and of his behavior, and she was always creating dramas and scenes and fusses, because this is how she had got him in the early days. But that was before they were sharing Congress, shall we say. Once they started to share Congress, his hunger began to abate because it was being satisfied. And then, when she did not produce a son, but a daughter, then had a miscarriage of a son, at a time that she was giving him a hard time and antagonizing Thomas Cromwell, who in those days was actually called Thomas Cromwell. I just throw that in for good measure. And at some point, the king got fed up of her antics and her demands and sought comfort in the arms of Jane Seymour, who was one of her ladies in waiting. And this time he didn't have the protracted farce that he'd had with Catherine of Aragon. He simply had her arrested, tried, and decapitated, freeing him to marry Jane Seymour. And what also assisted his endeavours was that Catherine of Aragon died shortly before Anne Boleyn was dispatched. This being YouTube, one has to choose one words carefully. But was Anne Boleyn nasty? She went out of her way to make life as difficult as possible for the king's elder daughter, Mary, and recommended on more than one occasion that he part her and her head. Well, he took Anne's recommendation, but shades of Mordecai and Queen Esther and Haman the Agagite, the picture behind us, Haman the Agagite built the gallows for Mordecai, and he swung from it. Anne was effectively, to mix my metaphors, hoisted on her own petard. And Meg's baby is being hoisted on her own petard. Her choice was public opprobrium. And who's the person who's suffering most from public revelations and public examinations of her rather unattractive underbelly? Meg's baby. Daisy Sunshine says, "Dear Lady C, the ex-spare told us he was his grandmother's most trusted person in the world, that Queen Elizabeth II could only confide in him." He did, didn't he? Well, I don't know what brought on that fit of delusionalism. But presumably ayahuasca, some psychedelic, little bits of grass, or happy powder, as Margaret Argyle used to refer to it as, and said that's what they called it in the 20s and 30s. Maybe that had something to do with his belief that she confided in him. She absolutely was assiduous in keeping him at arm's length and never engaging him in any conversation of any depth. I know that to be a fact. She didn't trust him as far as she could see him. So, was she going to confide in him? Yeah, of course. Anyway, to continue the question, do you think he knows our dear late Queen Elizabeth went to such lengths as to sweep for bugs before meeting with him and the pillow fluffer? Whatever that is. Or does he really suffer from such delusions of grandeur? He does. This also makes me wonder if our delightfully smart late Queen really did deliberately place her equerry behind the debacles at the Jubilee service with some kind of signal jamming device. Very well considered observation, as rumours have suggested, which would explain why they absolutely had to sit in the seats directed, instead of the York sisters and husbands didn't just shuffle up 2 places. Although, personally, I'd like to think that Her Majesty placed that rather dashing gentleman behind them, knowing the cameras would be focusing on the debacles, giving us ladies a gift of someone rather more handsome to look at. Quite a dish, no? Somehow that fits my image of the dear lady's sparkling sense of humour. I think you've got her measure there. Thank you for sharing time with us. Your wit and wisdom bring me joy. Well, thank you, Daisy Sunshine. Now to answer. Sweeping the library at Sandringham for bugs would have assured that there were no bugs there. So there, when you are in a dangerous situation or a situation that requires thoroughness, you are thorough. I point this out to my children all the time. Take nothing for granted and make no assumptions because they may be erroneous. So the only way to make sure that if Harry turned up with a bug, that they would know that it was his bug, was to make sure nobody else had a bug, and that they had absolute confidence in the fact that there were no bugs whatsoever in that room. My understanding is that is, I'm choosing my words very carefully here, a reasonable rationale for sweeping Sandringham for bugs. It also shows that there was no confidence that Harry would behave as they would be behaving and as they would have hoped he would behave. Because by then, and this is, remember, before Oprah and before Spare Me All That Nonsense and all the other nonsense, they already knew they couldn't trust him. And this was before Meghan and Harry turned up at events where they were then photographed with protuberances which suggested the possibility that they might. Well, that was the way of making absolutely sure, and also with Dishy Johnny behind, Megsy Baby and H. And remember also the head of MI6 was behind them as well. well, they would have neutralized any unapproved recording devices should they have been brought. So I hope that answers the question. Thomasin Hardy says, Lady C, would you please comment on King Charles's changing the ceremonial words from keeper of the faith to keeper of faith? I don't consider this woke at all, but an attempt to respect all faiths which are numerous in Britain. I have been shocked at responses to this, which range from comments which almost cross the lines of disdain for and prejudices of other religions, to those which accuse him of wishing to bring down the monarchy. Perhaps my opinion is honed by my age, older, for I don't know woke from awake most of the time, but I see his gesture as respectful and sensitive to others. Should you answer this, I thank you in advance. Well, the title which was given to Henry VIII after he wrote a defense of the faith by the Pope. So it really should not be a hereditary title, but it has been made a hereditary title by assumption of the British monarchy. But it really was never intended to be a hereditary title. And defensor fidei means defender of faith. Latin has no definite or indefinite article. So you don't have the faith or a faith in Latin. You just have faith. And it is a language that, for all its exactitude, has absolutely, as I said, no definite or indefinite article. So people in Latin would draw their conclusions from the meaning. Now, a totally accurate translation is defender of faith, not defender of the faith. And I agree with you. I do not think that the king is being disrespectful of the Church of England. I do not think he is being disrespectful of Christianity. You know, I'll use an example that's very left field. When Pope Benedict XVI was Cardinal Ratzinger, and he was supposedly very conservative, and one of the tenets of the Catholic Church is that it is the only true faith, and that it is the only true faith leading to salvation. He believed in the possibility of alien life. And he was asked, what would your reaction be if you had one question to ask an alien? And what would that question be? And his answer was really interesting, because his answer was, what is your understanding of God? That means that Benedict XVI accepted the fact that there were many ways to achieve salvation, and that our understanding of God is not the same as other cultures' understanding of God, and that does not negate their sincere beliefs. And I'll put it another way. The Dalai Lama has recommended that people don't change their religions, that they function within the religion of their culture. I actually see everything positive and nothing negative about respecting people who are believers. Believers, if they are true believers, if they love God, have far more in common with each other than non-believers. However, they have to be true believers, because doctrinaire believers, that is bad believers, that is extremists, pervert the purpose of religion. Lois Weinstock says, I would add to Jane Henry's comment that American slaves escaped to Canada, that Lord Simcoe, governor of Upper Canada, later Ontario, abolished slavery in that colony in 1794, 13 years before the abolition of the Slave Trade Act was passed, and a full 39 years before the Slavery Abolition Act came into force and effect. That's a very, very good observation to make. John Graves Simcoe was the first deputy governor of Upper Canada, Ontario, and there was a Lower Canada, which was Quebec, created in the Constitution of 1791. He was the lieutenant, actually it was, not deputy, lieutenant governor of Upper Canada from 1791 to 1796, when he became very ill with gout and had to go back to England. And I think he then was too ill to return to his post, and I think he resigned in 1798. He founded York, which is now Toronto, and he was also instrumental in creating various wonderful Canadian institutions, such as the courts of law, trial by jury, based upon English common law. He created for Canadians freehold land tenure, and also the abolition of slavery in Canada, because Canada, previous to that, had been a French colony, which the Marquis de Montcalm lost to General Wolfe in 1759 on the Plains of Abraham. And both Montcalm and Wolfe died in the battle, but the British won. He had a long-term policy, which was that Upper Canada, Ontario as it now is, be created as a model community built on noble and conservative precepts to demonstrate the superiority of the British system of monarchy over the American system of republicanism. Because remember, there was the American Civil War. Sorry, the American War of Independence, which had taken place before this. But Canada remained British, and he wanted a contrast. And to this day, if you go to Canada, you will see, at least I saw, and everybody I know says the same thing, Canada is very similar but radically different from, in other ways, the United States of America. It is, according to Canadians, a far more humane society, a far gentler society, a far more nurturing and caring society. So Simcoe's basic policies have borne fruit. And of course, Canada has remained a monarchy beside America. And American slaves fled to Canada. There's also a statue of Simcoe, General Simcoe, in Queen's Park in downtown Toronto. Lovely statue. Now, what is interesting is that General Simcoe was actually never made a lord in his lifetime. But there are place names, streets, etc. in Canada where he is referred to as Lord Simcoe. But in fact, he died before he could be made a lord. And Nick Stone says, and Lady C, what about the role of the Ashantis and other West African coast slavers? And the Barbary pirates who even raided Iceland and decimated the Cornish fishing fleet and villages in the 17th century UK, and the Ottoman, Turkish, Nogai, Tatar slave raids into southern Russia and Ukraine, and even as far as Moscow for centuries, and the Ottoman Turks killing all babies born of black slaves. This does not excuse white slavery, but it puts in context that this is not to deny the appalling crime of slavery, but it puts it in context. But in those centuries, it was a part of how people lived. Thank God we mostly are different today. But we cannot continually be apologizing for the past. We need to ensure the future and the present. P.S. I am from a mixed race family. Nick Stone, thank you very much. I am sick to my back teeth of black and brown people who want to pretend that slavery was something practiced exclusively by white people against them. It is racism of the highest order. It is socially divisive. It is historically inaccurate. It is a bare-faced lie, and it is non-productive. Now, the Ottomans, and this is really interesting, when these victims, who incidentally have not been slaves, whose grandparents, whose great-grandparents have not been slaves, how far back are we supposed to go? Oh, I suppose just far enough back to give them all a check for $5 million apiece. Like the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez way of banking. Just print the money and don't worry about inflation. Well, I'm going to make 1 or 2 points. Practically every sultan of Turkey of the Ottoman Empire was born of a slave woman. If you go to the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, which I have been, you see all of the harem quarters. You then go to the Dolmabahce Palace, which is on, if I remember correctly, on the other side of the Bosphorus. And that's a far more modern palace. But in the Topkapi Palace, they had the harem and they had the concubines. Most of the concubines were slaves. They were the most desirable slaves were Circassian, Georgian, European. For instance, Suleiman the Magnificent's Sultana Roxolana was a Ruthenian slave. She was the mother of the next Sultan, Selim II. Another country where an empress regnant was a slave, was actually a slave, was Russia. Peter the Great's second wife, Catherine I, who became empress in her own right after his death, and was the mother of the Empress Elizabeth of Russia. She was born a Pole, and she was enslaved, and she was the property of Prince Alexander Menshikov, and doubtless, according to some people, his mistress. I'm not sure she was his mistress, but she certainly became the great love of Peter the Great's life. So, I suppose we're going to have to give reparations to all of the Ottoman imperial family, and all of the Russian imperial family, because they're descended from slaves. You begin to see how ludicrous the whole thing is. And Carol Talawi says, my husband's family had a male house slave who was, and I'm going to use the word snipped. She uses the medically correct word, but this being YouTube, I don't want to fall afoul of their rather punctilious rules regarding language. At a young age, after being sold by his father to my husband's family, slaves were often subjected to that procedure, incidentally. This was in Egypt. Many years later, the family of this servant came to take him home in his old age, but he chose to stay with my husband's family until his death. Marrying an Egyptian and moving to Egypt has been enlightening, exciting, and a life experience I could never have imagined in my youth in Southern California. Well, yes, Egypt is a completely different culture. I have to say, I love Egypt. And there was slavery all over the world. It is really boring and tiresome that a certain segment of racist brown and black people have hijacked the whole subject to the detriment of history, and also to the disapproval of many black and brown people who understand that it is nonsensical to try to create racial division when we should be aiming for ever increasingly greater racial harmony. And to an extent, we have achieved a lot of racial harmony in Great Britain. I also have to point out that we certainly have in many of the former British colonies as well. I speak as a Jamaican. Jamaica in the 1950s was at the forefront of enhanced race relations socially in a way that the United States of America wasn't, because there were still segregation laws in place at the time in the United States. And I also congratulate the Americans for having, between the 1960s and now, enhanced race relations to the extent that they have. And I agree with Thomas Sowell and Morgan Freeman and Martin Luther King. We need to forget this obsession with the difference in people's color and focus on their character. And on that note, I'll say, I hope this has been of some interest to you. If it has, please remember to keep the questions and comments coming in, as this is a conversation. It needs to be a two-way street. It needs your input. Okay? So, questions and comments, please. Thank you so much. God bless. And if you have enjoyed it, like, share, subscribe, press the notification bell, and God bless you.